Okay, so this is a video that's going to show you the 3 different ways to solve quadratic equations. Okay, so the first method that I'm going to show you is to factor and to use the zero product property. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is set up your factoring diamond problem. So we need 2 numbers that add to negative 3x and multiply to negative 4. So that would be negative 4x and negative 1x. Then you want to put them into your generic rectangle so that you can find the product or the outside of the rectangle. So I know that I can put in negative 4x and, oops, that should be a positive 1. So this is an x, negative 4, and 1. So then my factored form is x minus 4 times x plus 1. Now this is where the zero product property comes in. You are setting those smaller equations equal to 0 and then solving. So in this case, x would be 4 because plugging 4 in gives me 0. And in this case, x would be negative 1 because when I plug negative 1 in, I get 0. So my 2 solutions are x equals 4 and x equals negative 1. Okay, so the next method that we have for solving is called completing the square. So that's changing it into vertex. Of x squared is 1. Because when you solve this, when you change it into graphing form, you need to divide the middle term, divided by 2 is negative 1.5. And we divide because in order to have a square, our sides have to be equal, and we have to use the negative 3x evenly. We have to split it up evenly. You fill in the ones tile by doing negative 1.5 times negative 1.5, and you get 2.25. Now I have to think, do I have the ones? Have I stayed equivalent? So you're going to compare negative 4 minus 2.25. You always take what you started with minus what you have now. And so I found out that actually I have to subtract 6.25 to stay even. So my vertex form is 0 equals x minus 1.5 squared minus 6.25. Now solving would mean that I need to get x by itself. So I'm going to add 6.25 to both sides. So I get 6.25 the square root of 6.25 equals x minus 1.5. Now whenever you take the square root of a number, you have the positive and the negative. So the square root of 6.25 is 2.5 and negative 2.5. And then the last step is to add 1.5 to both sides to get x by itself. So I got x equals 4 and x equals negative 1. And that is how you solve your quadratic equation using completing the square. So change it into vertex form, which is what I did here, and then solve to get x by itself. Now the last strategy is the last one that we learned in class, and that's using the quadratic formula. So what we're going to do is first write out the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Now whenever you start the quadratic formula, the first thing that you should do after writing it out is define for this formula, for this equation, what a, b, and c will equal. A is always the number touching x squared. So in this case, it would be 1. B is always the number touching x. So in this case, negative 3. And c is always the number by itself. In this case, negative 4. So now that we know what A, B, and C are, we can go ahead and plug them in. So I could have just written a positive 3 at the beginning, but I wanted to show you guys that it always is a negative sign and then whatever your B value is. So in this case, it really does simplify to be a positive 3, plus or minus the square root. And then a strategy that you can use is to plug this into a calculator. So exactly as it's written, so parentheses, negative 3, parentheses squared, minus 4 times 1 times negative 4. And always remember that this symbol right here is a minus, a subtraction sign. It is not a negative when you use the calculator. So we will get 25 when we plug that in to our calculator. And then divided by 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. So the two equations that I'm going to solve are because I have a plus minus. So I know that the first one is 3 plus the square root of 25, which is 5, and then divided by 2. The next one is 3 minus the square root of 25, 5, divided by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And that is how you solve a quadratic using the three methods: factoring, completing the square, and the quadratic formula.